Hey everyone, for those of you who haven't been here before, my name is Derek Royden. I'm a freelance writer. I usually have a story that appears every week on nationofchange.org. I highly recommend checking out the site. If you want to get to my articles directly, you can find links to them here on the blog. And if you are watching this on YouTube, you can find a link to the blog in the description below. So to get right to today's story, it's from the magazine Jacobin. And it's about kind of a public intellectual. I saw him. He's a very engaging speaker. I saw him a few months ago on Joe Rogan's podcast, which is probably one of the most popular podcasts in the world. The article is entitled Steven Pinker, False Friend of the Enlightenment, and it's by Landon Frim and Harrison Fluss. So they begin. Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. They're reviewing his new book, Enlightenment Now, which I honestly probably won't read. But Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now is a manual for liberal self-congratulation. This preening tome professes a pragmatic and quantitative approach to the world's problems. For Pinker, modern capitalist democracy has basically gotten things right, and activism should at most consist of pushing for minor improvements, mitigating bad symptoms around the edges. This is the problem with, and just even watching him before, is this kind of weird optimism when really, it's warranted, say, by some measures, like, by literacy or by educational outcomes in many countries, but to take such an optimistic view of the world ignores just the depth of the problems we're finding ourselves in. I mean, from climate change to war to economic warfare that's being waged against countries around the world. It's really, really hard to take an optimistic point of view, and it actually seems kind of counterproductive. I mean, it's good to feel good about things, but it's important to recognize the real problems that are out there. So, systemic critique, ideologies, and big ideas are downright dangerous, Pinker says. Criticism of liberal capitalism is thus the provenance of hysterical populists on both the left and the right. What Marxist professors, in quotes, and racist Trump supporters have in common is they just don't know or want to admit how good they have it. Pinker is passionate in his tepidity and contemptuous of anyone daring to criticize the present world order. Superficially, Enlightenment Now is compelling to the fair-minded reader, as it's chock full of statistics and graphs, ostensibly demonstrating the march of progress since the Age of Reason. Liberals will applaud Pinker's frequent praise of social programs and the welfare state as necessary supplements to the free market. At the same time, reading Pinker gives one a subtle but persistent feeling of nausea that surfaces every time he excoriates social justice warriors or cites capitalist fundamentalists like Friedrich von Hayek, famous, he's from the Austrian school. Most libertarian thinkers basically look to him as kind of a father of their movement. The Enlightenment is shorn of its most egalitarian and democratic elements. It no longer resembles the intellectual ferment of the French Revolution. Instead, Pinker's Enlightenment mimics the hierarchy, conservatism, and authoritarianism of the Ancien Regime, that historical enemy of the radical Enlightenment. But this muddying of the ideological waters is part of Pinker's deliberate strategy. Even when he covers historical figures, he makes a point of throwing together radical rationalists like Baruch Spinoza alongside classical conservatives like Edmund Burke. The ideologies of these figures are thus blunted, confused, and made absolutely malleable in his hands. Pinker does not so much celebrate Enlightenment reason as repackage it for his neoliberal agenda. He limits reason to make room for the market, and this is really the problem with this kind of thinking. They go on in a section entitled Pinker's Worldview. The hero of Pinker's tale is the human subject, but only certain human subjects. These are the scientist and educator, but all the more importantly, the quantitative analyst, the entrepreneur, and the pro-market politician. No wonder the dust jacket of Enlightenment Now boasts that it is Bill Gates' new favorite book of all time. Pinker's heroes are the creators, the music makers, or, to continue quoting that other magnate, Willy Wonka, the dreamers of dreams. And I think this is an interesting thing too, and it's something in our culture that we don't really discuss anymore, but human beings are basically, from the beginning, cooperative animals. What made us successful allowed us to basically take over the entire earth, was the fact that we were willing to work together. This whole idea that we have, and this is really a fairly recent phenomenon of kind of the individual as the ultimate measure of society, is really dangerous and quite frankly kind of stupid. Even the so-called geniuses like your Bill Gates of the world had thousands of people who made their success possible. We have to realize this. We should not be putting such people on pedestals. I notice more and more now that the people that we look up to most in our society are the so-called entrepreneurs, these business people, these capitalists. But really, they actually don't create all that much that is of value. They're not the ones putting the food on your table. They're not the ones ensuring that you have health care when you're sick. These are people, that use algorithms or create computer programs, and they don't even create them themselves. They have, usually a lineup of engineers working to give them ideas for products. So this whole idea that someone like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or even Steve Jobs, who I know so many people love, their success would not be possible without the help of many, many other people. And this is a form of cooperative effort. We hear a lot on the right about, the great fear of collectivization. I don't like the term collectivization, but I do like the term cooperation, and I don't think that there's a problem with people working together, and I do not think that even as an individual myself, that my needs should be placed above everyone else's, or that I'm in some kind of weird, selfish struggle to take as much as I can before I die. It's completely crazy. So anyway, they go on. No wonder the dust... Oh, sorry. What Pinker valorizes is the heroic creation of businesses, markets, ideas, and information as against a universe that tends towards blandness, sameness, and uninteresting monotony. These creative types are valuable precisely in their struggle against a world which is hostile, or at least indifferent to human needs and flourishing. This is the sense in which Pinker is, surprisingly to most, a sort of pessimist. It is human effort and will that must create their own salvation against the dire backdrop of cosmic nothingness. Pinker is a cheerleader for science and technology. He opposes the irrationalism of the eco-pessimist and their desire to prostrate themselves before Gaia. Pinker's fundamental guiding principle is that of entropy. Borrowed from the second law of thermodynamics, entropy is the idea that in closed systems, things become less ordered and more chaotic over time. Human organization and culture are thus a Sisyphean battle, where human effort hits up against the unyielding gravity of existence. Here the values are inverted, and instead of bemoaning that people are killing Mother Earth, Earth is trying desperately to kill us. He means this in a deep way, not a fear of the Earth's ecosystem, but a metaphysical dread of the universe itself. A cognitive psychologist, Pinker is fond of importing scientific concepts in order to bolster his political arguments. In this case, Pinker employs an accepted law of physics and proceeds to widely elevate it to a metaphysical first principle, and more bizarrely, makes it the cornerstone of his politics. Not only are closed physical systems entropic, but so is existence itself, including the human condition. And this is like kind of, this kind of use of something from science to kind of explain human social organization and why ideas like socialism and communism are bad is really disingenuous at best. They go on in the article to talk about how Pinker is constantly kind of berating people who are SJWs or social justice warriors. But I mean, there are people who cross a line and get a little bit hysterical in terms of, their social justice feelings or whatever. But at the same time, this really has value. I mean, if it weren't for social justice warriors from a generation or two ago, there would have been no civil rights movement. There would be no feminism. There would be no third world rights movement or independence movements in so many countries. These were not usually on the shoulders of simply one person. These were on the shoulders of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of people. It's all well and good for a very well-paid author and public intellectual like Steven Pinker to say that doing things, that kind of life itself comes down to the individual, and that something like inequality, is just a fact of life that is subjectively bad for one person if they're unequal, but it works out in an optimistic way for the whole system. I come down more on the social justice side of things. I think that, we can work together cooperatively as human beings to make everyone's life better. There's so much work to be done, with it's hard to have an optimistic view of the world when we're facing biodiversity loss at an unprecedented degree, and climate change is maybe 12 to 15 years away from making the world a very different place and a much harder place for us to live. We really have to think about these things, and we really have to kind of filter out thinkers like Pinker or even other people on the so-called intellectual dark web that are even worse than he is, like someone like Jordan Peterson, who they make a comparison to here, who's just a ridiculous clown who's on an all-meat diet and apparently didn't sleep for a month because he drank a cider. Or people like Dave Rubin, who is completely vapid and just intellectually uninspired, as to even to the crazies like Alex Jones. These people have far too much influence on the culture. And their influence is only growing because people are looking for really simple answers to really complex problems. I promise that I'm never going to try and explain things in such a simple way, as clean your room. But anyway, I think, that's enough for today. You can find a link to the article on Jacobin below. I recommend reading the magazine every once in a while. It's really good, contrarian, left-wing magazine if you're into that point of view. And even if you're not, it's good to get other influences. I try to read things even on the right, as often as I can. I will read different points of view because you might learn something you didn't know before, and it might bring you to a different point of view, and this is a good thing, and I just find it, once again I'm using the word disingenuous, that a lot of these people on the so-called intellectual dark web cry about social justice warriors, but at the same time portray themselves as victims of these self-same people who are about the most harmless people on earth. The worst they can do is kind of join a Twitter mob and make you feel bad online. So thanks very much for watching. That's it for today, and always remember,